Well, hello and welcome to another installment of our Coast Guard Academy Admissions Partner webinar series. Today we're going to talk about Coast Guard accession sources, both enlisted and officer accessions. Around this time of year, a lot of our admissions partners will be talking with applicants who apply to the Coast Guard Academy, and for every one student that they get to congratulate on their appointment, they may be interacting with up to 4 students who did not get appointed this year. So here are some other ways that we can push kind of Coast Guard opportunities, both enlisted and officer, to make sure that students are left with a feeling of kind of hope and further opportunity, and not to mention that they have additional opportunities to apply to CGA if that first attempt or second attempt doesn't go through. And oftentimes that is the case with a lot of applicants, not just for the Coast Guard Academy, but any accession program. You know, if at first you don't succeed, try again. You'll be sitting in an OCS class and ask how many of you applied 2 or 3 times to get here, and almost every single person's hand will go up. So with that said, let's get started. General overview for what we're going to cover today. I'll talk about those enlistment opportunities such that are controlled by the Coast Guard Recruiting Command, CGRC, headquartered down in Washington, D.C. Both active duty enlistment, reserve enlistment. We'll talk about officer programs. As Darnell had come in and mentioned earlier today, there are a combination of 38 ways to become an officer in the United States Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard Academy really is only 2 of those ways, enlisted to CGA or direct to CGA, with a variation of that prep school opportunity, that fifth year, or coming direct for that 4-year undergrad. The Coast Guard Academy is the only program that handles that is handled by the Coast Guard Academy Admissions Office. So if you're an admissions partner or a student who is looking at the Coast Guard Academy admissions process, you will only deal with the Coast Guard Academy. For all other accession sources, those are handled by Coast Guard Recruiting Command or your local recruiting office. And when I say local recruiting office, and I've got a map behind me here, you can't really see the pins too well, but some of those local offices for certain states may be out of your state or out of your region. For instance, if you're applying from, let's say, Wisconsin or Minnesota, to a Coast Guard accession source other than CGA, your local recruiting station is going to be in Chicago, Illinois. So that may require you to travel quite a distance and may be a barrier that you have to overcome in order to assess into the Coast Guard, into one of these programs. Those do change depending upon resources and funding. So make sure that if you are interested in these opportunities, or if you want to learn more, you can find a lot of this information, which I'll repeat again. This website is www.gocoastguard.com. That's for all the other accession sources. And then for the Coast Guard Academy at www.uscga.edu. So those other accession sources I mentioned include the MARGRAD program, our Marine Graduate Program, CSPI or CSPI SLRP, which stands for College Student Pre-Commissioning Initiative. The SLRP stands for Student Loan Repayment Program, and we'll touch on that later on. OCS, Officer Candidate School, the Wi-Fi program, which is the Wilkes Flight Initiative, direct commissioning programs, health professional programs, reserve opportunities, and enlisted to officer programs as well. And then I'll touch a little bit on those reserve programs in a slide coming later in the presentation. So to start with, we'll talk about enlistment opportunities. So besides CGA and besides officer opportunities in the Coast Guard, enlistment is another chance for members to join. By getting started, you want to contact your local recruiting office. I would recommend, and Chief Bros can back me up on this perhaps, that you call ahead of time to set up your appointment. It is difficult in some cases to just walk into a recruiting office. I would recommend calling or emailing your local recruiter to initiate that conversation. Even I myself, as a Coast Guard Academy admissions representative, was not able to get into recruiting offices, just kind of like cold call walking in to say hi to folks, and as I was in the area recruiting for the academy. So it is very important to set up those meetings ahead of time. They often keep the door locked and they don't buzz people in that don't have meetings. So not to sound standoffish as a service, because I think as a culture we are pretty inclusive and representative of everybody and welcoming, but we want to make sure that you are going through the proper channels. So you can find a local recruiter, again, at www.gocoastguard.com. You must take the Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery, or ASVAB. For many high school students, you may not realize this at the time, how important that test is into determining your rates once you get into the military. Not just the Coast Guard, but any military branch. So I highly recommend taking your time on the aptitude test. Chief might have a couple words of wisdom there for folks, but it's important, and it determines kind of what you're able to do later on. You can retake that aptitude test once you're in the service, but it could delay your ability to join those rates that you wish to participate in, such as like aviation survival technician, the rescue swimmer program, or those law enforcement ME, maritime enforcement specialists. So consider that when you're sitting for those ASVAB tests. And then active duty for enlistment, you must be between the ages of 17 and 30 years old. If you're 17, you'll need parental or guardian consent to sign for you until you turn 18. You must be physically fit and willing to undergo physical exams. And here we see Chief Brost just chimed in here for the ASVAB. 36 is the minimum ASVAB score for the Coast Guard, and is the highest of all services. If you want an aviation job, you need to have a score around 65 on the ASVAB. So thank you very much, Chief. I appreciate that. You must be there is a military entrance processing station that you'll be going to after working with the recruiting station. This is called MEPS. It's essentially where all of kind of your security background, medical screening, and your oath of office takes place before you report to boot camp. And boot camp in this case is going to be in Cape May, New Jersey, an 8-week minimum program. So most graduates complete in 8 weeks. There are times in which a member must be held for an additional week or more. Those vary for certain reasons, but that's kind of the active duty accession into enlistment programs, the very, very surface, very general idea behind it. There are reserve opportunities as well for enlistment with a similar accession program. I don't know if the boot camp may be a little shorter or rolled out differently for reservists. Chief will probably chime in there. 3 weeks, there you go, 3 weeks for reservists. And then, of course, once you're in boot camp as an E1, E2, most are graduating boot camp at the E2, E3 level. There are opportunities to advance on a regular basis based on your testing, based on awards, based on kind of time in service, time and rate, up through the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, E10. Of course, it's a pyramid, so you get fewer and fewer ranks as you move up. And then enlisted to warrant programs, the warrant officer programs, are an opportunity for enlistment members who have achieved a certain rank, usually Chief Petty Officer, and a certain time in grade and a certain proficiency in their grade, and the rate to then move into this warrant program, and then warrant to lieutenant programs to commission them in as lieutenants in the Coast Guard as well. So that's just a very general overview of our enlistment activities. There are various enlisted rates ranging from gunner's mate and bosun mate to aviation rates, maintenance technicians, aviation survival technicians. There are rates that involve intel and cybersecurity. There are rates that involve electrical engineering, mechanical engineering. So really, understand your rates, and in some cases, those rates also may come with bonuses. So ask those questions as well. I know the Coast Guard's typically strapped for cooks, so our culinary specialists, that's another rate that has some opportunities there for folks interested in looking into enlistment service. So there are 3 types of commissioning sources as we move into our officer programs here. There are permanent regular commissions. The Coast Guard Academy is the only session source where you can receive a permanent regular commission. None of the other programs offered by the Coast Guard grant these permanent regular commissions. They're all temporary regular commissions or reserve commissions. And you can kind of read through right there kind of what that entails as far as who they're granted to, how long or how much obligated service is required, to either get out of that temporary commission status and revert back to whatever enlisted warrant rank or non-commission status you have, or into a non-active status in the reserve. So let's see, we have a question here from Robert George, and I appreciate the questions throughout the presentation. I have heard that the Coast Guard may be considering active involvement of auxiliary in enlistment process for enlisted rank. So I'm going to leave that one to Chief. I don't know if he has heard anything as far as auxiliarists being involved. However, what I have heard is auxiliarists working in recruiting stations or recruiting offices to assist in that process of assessing and helping with some of the administrative side of accessions into the Coast Guard. So great point there. I know many of our admissions partners are Coast Guard auxiliarists, and they may be helping in recruiting stations as well as the admissions process in reaching out with applicants and reaching out with prospective Coast Guard members. So good question. I appreciate you bringing that up. And there we go. So Aux help at recruiting stations. Thank you very much, David. We'll first touch on the Coast Guard Academy. Many of you know the requirements already. You must be a U.S. citizen, 17 to 22 years of age, no dependents, unmarried, and at least a high school graduate or GED equivalency. There are debt restrictions as far as how much debt you can have or coming into the service with debt. And I'll just pause right here for a second. So Chief also mentioned CGRC uses aux as needed to support administrative outreach support and recruiting offices. Oh, perfect. Thank you for the follow-up there. Our application is open August through January, and this gets you into a 4-year undergraduate program here in New London, Connecticut, which is free to attend. Graduates receive their Bachelor's of Science degree, no matter which of the 9 majors they graduate in, including management and government. There is a 5-year service obligation, at which time more than 85% of our officers choose to continue past that 5-year obligation. And then career paths exist in afloat, aviation, engineering, law, intel, finance, you name it. There is likely a career path that will associate with what you want to do. And then, of course, postgraduate opportunities, which is going to be coming up in one of our next webinar series, talking about postgraduate opportunities, and then retirement opportunities as well. So working towards pension plans, working towards TSP or thrift savings plan contributions. The Coast Guard will set you up very well for your second, third career options once your 20+ years is up, or even before that time with the new blended retirement system. The next accession source we'll talk about is the MARGRAD, or Marine Graduates, which are graduates of several different types of institutions, including the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point, New York. Ooh, no, I'm just kidding. We have great officers that come out of this program, one of which, a good friend of mine here in the office, Brendan Doherty, class of 2009, honorary class of 2009 here at the Coast Guard Academy, and married to one of my classmates. Brennan was a graduate of the MARGRAD program. The other 6 sponsor maritime academies include Massachusetts, Maine, New York, Great Lakes, Texas A&M, and California. There are other programs upon approval by CGRC. It's not limited to these 6 alone, but these 6 are the most common programs that students graduate from. So after a graduate from a MARGRAD program gets into the Coast Guard, what traditionally happens is they are assigned to a prevention mission community. So that means usually it's in a waterways management office, nav safety, boating. These are associated with sectors and district offices and bases. And once they're assigned there, they then work with the Coast Guard assignment officer to make sure that they're within the job path, that there's placement, that there's availability for, and then to get them TDY orders to go to a direct commissioning officer program here at the Coast Guard Academy for 4 to 5 weeks. So it's essentially a Coast Guard indoctrination after they've graduated from their MARGRAD program. So they graduate from the program, they've got their undergrad degree, they have their commission, they're placed in the prevention community that is best suited or where there is a need, and then they are sent TDY or temporarily assigned to the DCO program here, Direct Commissioning Officer program, for that 4 to 5 week leadership and indoctrination course. We have here Jeremy Moore. Does CGA and MMI students have combined courses or programs together throughout the academy years? This is actually an interesting one. The Merchant Marine Academy and Coast Guard, or Merchant Marine Academy is the only program or only academy that does not have an exchange program with the Coast Guard Academy for our cadets. I think there are very few opportunities for our cadets to interact outside of kind of at the athletic conference area and the Secretary's Cup. And the reason why is because the Merchant Marine Academy is on a trimester system, with one of those semesters being at sea. So the other service academies, Army, Navy, Air Force, they allow our students to go for a semester during their junior year, the second class year, and then send students here as well. So no, to answer your question, there is not currently. But that's our MARGRAD program. So that's another accession source to become an officer in the U.S. Coast Guard. Officer Candidate School is one of the most common that you'll hear outside of the Coast Guard Academy. It lives here in New London, Connecticut. You must be between the ages of 17 and 30 years old. Again, a college graduate, you have to have your bachelor's degree or an E5 above with college experience. And I think that college experience has to be at least at an associate's level. Chief might back me up on that as well. Once you have been selected, which is a very intense selection process, and I recommend using the OJAC, the Officer Job Aid Kit, which you can find on www.gocoastguard.com. Once you have been you've gone through the process and you've gone through your interview and you've been selected, then you attend this 17-week training course. Oh, there we go. Chief says 30 credit hours for E5 and above are needed. One college level math course. Great. Thank you for the insight. Wonderful detail there. 17-week training course here in New London, Connecticut. It's a leadership, management, NAV, law enforcement, and military subject course that indoctrinates you into the Coast Guard. And then you'll be working on getting into this program through your local recruiting office. So not the Coast Guard Academy, but this is, again, another officer accession point for students to look at if they're interested after they graduate from any of those undergraduate program, qualifying undergraduate programs, or qualifying in the enlisted ranks as well. The interview, I've sat on some OCS selection interview panels. They're usually made up of junior officers, so 02, 03, and above. So you might have one lieutenant commander, one commander. It's rare to have anyone over the rank of commander sitting on those interview boards, but it does happen. It may be a mix of genders and career makeups on that board, and they just ask kind of questions that are set out by CGRC to get to kind of the bottom of whether this is a good candidate for the program, the OCS program. So, and again, these members also go through MEPS. They get their fingerprints taken. They go through the medical. They go through the physical. And it's a challenging program. We see them here at the Coast Guard Academy. I remember seeing, I think it's in your 4 years as a cadet, you see 11 classes graduate, and the last OCS class you see graduates two weeks ahead of you in May. So that's a little disheartening from a cadet's perspective as far as seeing other folks kind of go off. But a lot of them have done their time in college. They have their degrees. They've done their enlisted experience. And I've served with those folks out at sea, especially in my first unit on the Bear out of Portsmouth, Virginia. Had some great OCS officers on board, and you get a lot from the various perspectives from your accession sources. So they are a great source and wealth of information. The next program I'm going to touch on here is called CSPI, or the College Student Pre-Commissioning Initiative Scholarship. The other part of this is the student loan payment program, or student loan program. So I'll talk on that a little bit as well. You must be between the ages of 19 and 27, a U.S. citizen currently enrolled in or accepted for enrollment or pending in a AA, Associates of Arts or Associates of Science degree at a junior college or community college, who plans to continue on to their bachelor's degree. And you may be then eligible for the CSPI scholarship. You have to maintain a 2.5 out of 4.0 GPA, and there is an interview process. Once selected for this program, you have to attend a qualifying college. Now, what is a qualifying college? In this particular case, because CSPI is really aimed towards and geared towards a recruitment standpoint, so we put students in this kind of as close to an ROTC position as possible to then share opportunities in the Coast Guard with other students around them in their qualifying colleges. And those involve mainly underrepresented minority serving colleges. Now, do you have to be a underrepresented student to apply for these opportunities? Absolutely not. Majority and minority students are welcome to apply, and both compete very well for the opportunity. But you will be attending one of these kind of HBCUs or historically underrepresented schools around the country. They have great names that come with them. The name on the degree will be very worthwhile and worth your time. But you have to maintain those minimum standards in order to graduate, qualify, and then come into the OCS program. So you'll be selected for the program and then enlisted into the Coast Guard. You complete your basic training. That's all 8 weeks. You must perform a minimum of 16 hours a month of Coast Guard activities in the school, meaning that you're going to wear your uniform to classes at least, I think it's twice a week. And this includes once a week, excuse me, while on campus and during 4 weekly hours of Coast Guard duties. You have to attend 3-week officer candidate indoctrination after your junior year of the program, and then attend a 17-week OCS following graduation from that. So you will have things that are filling your time in between junior and senior year in the summer, and you will have enlisted obligations and obligations during the week. But the big thing here is that this is essentially a Coast Guard scholarship paying for the 2 years of your bachelor's degree after you finish your associate's program. So this is a really tremendous opportunity out there. The loan forgiveness or the loan payback program, that is one where it's similar to CSPI, similar requirements, but this is for students who have already completed or are enrolled in a bachelor's degree program, typically in their junior, senior year. And what they'll do is the Coast Guard will pay for pay $10,000 per year for the student to pay back their student loans once they've completed the program and entered OCS and then commissioned into the Coast Guard. So you'll continue to receive money on an annual basis to pay back your student loans that are already existing and hanging out there. Okay, so now we move into our direct commissioning programs, and we're nearly at the end of our presentation here. We'll open it up for some Q&A at the end. The next program I want to touch on is the direct commissioning program or direct commission program. It's typically an 8-week commissioning source held here at New London, Connecticut, and you'll see there's a theme developing here. Every single officer accession source at one point comes through New London at the Coast Guard Academy. The first one I'll point out here is the Wilkes Flight Initiative or Wi-Fi. It's for high-performing officer trainees enrolled in their senior year of college, typically in the CSPI program, looking to enter career in aviation. If they qualify for direct entry, they'll actually be sent right to flight school after completing their OCS experience. So the Wilkes Flight Initiative is really a great way to kind of fast track yourself into flight school after CSPI, after OCS, and then once you get your commission. The other DCO programs are for those between the ages of 21 and 34. They involve aviation, engineering programs, health professional programs, including dental, pharmacist, physician, physical therapy, environmental health. There's other programs out there as well. Law, intelligence, or intel, selected schools. So if there is a certain school that we need or a certain specialty we need in the Coast Guard, and then prior trained military officers. In some cases, these military officers do take, in most cases, do take a pay decrease or a rank decrease when they come and transfer into the Coast Guard. Selected applicants will receive a 5-year active duty obligation after completing their accession obligations. The selection panel determines the appointment grade of each selectee. So for instance, a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, someone with advanced training, advanced certification, who may have student debt or student loans, who can't wait to go through 01, 02, 03, may come in right at lieutenant level or 03, and then go through the accession source that way so that they can start paying back some of those student loans or certification costs earlier on. And selectees will receive a commission as an ensign or lieutenant junior grade in the U.S. Coast Guard Reserve. All right. So those are direct commissioning programs. All right, so for enlisted reserves, I touched on that a little bit, but you must be between the ages of 17 and 30. Some college experience is recommended, and then it's the 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year type of deal. for the reserve program, many of whom are associated with our port security units or PSUs around the country, and they deploy often to overseas billets. They deploy to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and I don't know if Chief has more to put out there for the enlisted reserves, but it's a great chance for someone to kind of work their way into the Coast Guard through our reserve routes. And then Officer Candidate School Reserve Commission, or OCSR, or ROCKY, is another 8-week commissioning source. You have to have reached your 21st birthday, but not your 31st, so between the ages of 21 and 30, as of 30 September of the fiscal year in which your selection panel convenes. Be of outstanding moral character, U.S. citizen, eligible for a secret clearance, and really a lot of these requirements are the same for every accession source. No more than 3 dependents, bachelor, except for Coast Guard Academy, no dependents for that. Bachelor's degree or higher with a 2.5 or higher GPA, meet our debt obligations, conduct an interview, and no more than 6 years of non-Coast Guard active duty experience. So if you're another military service member, you can't have more than 6 years of non-Coast Guard active duty. You have to meet your physical height, weight, and then of course we have a number of tattoo requirements as well. So visible tattoos around the neck, head, ears, eyes, face. There are some disqualifying tattoos, including some tattoos on the hands. And then I think the tattoo policies have recently been updated to include kind of sleeves, leg tattoos. So make sure that you're checking with your recruiting office and checking with the newest policy for the Coast Guard. And then one of our last programs here, the temporary commissioning program, is one in which someone can be temporarily commissioned by the Coast Guard to serve out a certain amount of time, and then once that time's up, they'll automatically be removed for a certain amount of period out of the commission. It's like a cooling off period until the commission is then renewed. So those wrap up essentially all of our accession sources. Again, here are those 3 major resources that I recommend everyone check out: uscga.edu, www.gocoastguard.com, and then within the Go Coast Guard site, you'll see the U.S. Coast Guard Officer Application Job Aid Kit, or OJAC. That is a very important resource. I recommend you check that out, download it. I'm going to peruse through it a little bit. If you are someone who is looking at one of these programs to get involved, then that is a must-have part of your library when you're assessing in through a commissioning source. So check out those at gocoastguard.com. What I'll do is I will head back to our overview slide of all the different programs and open it up for questions. So we have a few minutes here at the very end. Thank you so much for hanging in with me throughout the presentation. Chief Brost, if I missed anything at all, or if there is something that you want to kind of elaborate on or just clarify, please do so at this time. Anybody else, if you'd like to enter a question, comment for myself or for Chief, so we will be happy to assist you there. So thank you again. All right. I appreciate it. So thorough as always. We're coming up here to the end of our time. Are there any questions? Wonderful. So if there are no other questions, I appreciate everyone's time and consideration joining us here today. I look forward to having you at one of our future webinar series. Like I mentioned, one of our upcoming ones is going to be on graduate school and postgraduate opportunities here from the Coast Guard Academy. We may have another message here from Mr. Moore, but in the meantime, thank you all for being here. I'll let you all sign off. And thank you so much, Chief Brost, for chiming in, providing that valuable insight as well. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much for being part of the Admissions Partner Program. And as always, go Bears.